mañana café, por la tarde ron. Ya estamos en la calle, sal de tu balcón. Por la mañana café, por la tarde ron. Ya estamos en la calle, sal de tu balcón. De Arecibo hasta Ponce, de Fajardo a Rincón, en la voz de todo un barrio, desde Almirante a Frontón.
Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. It is an absolute honor every year to welcome in the authors and guests for the Caribbean Literary Festival. It's my favorite time of year. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Let's give a big warm welcome to one of the founders, Marsha, to get the ball rolling here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Fiction and the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival 2025. I'm M1, and we have M2, and an incredible team of volunteers who's getting our theme, Root and Remedy, off of the ground. This is day 2, and the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival is a non-profit. We're small and mighty, and we're entirely dedicated to uplifting the work of Caribbean and Caribbean American writers. This year, the theme, Root and Remedy, seeks to platform these stories, ancestral stories, indigenous stories, and a return to those stories as a prescription for healing and as a prescription to deal with the multiple malaises of our time. When we were conceptualizing the program, we felt that the theme of the Botanica, which is very central to the Caribbean spiritual identity, was very appropriate. We thought that we should write every day as a prescription. So all of the events have been curated as a series of prescriptions under certain themes. And if you have one of these program guides handy, they're pretty limited edition. We hope that you were able to get one. It describes the approach to the programming. And our approach to our programming for readers and those who enjoy literature in the diaspora is pretty unconventional. And that's simply because we aim to democratize the Caribbean story to everyone who's reading and bring them into the fold of Caribbean literature's beauty and certainly its application in all forms of life. So today, day 2, is the program strand is For the Wandering Soul, Stories of Return and Reinvention. And all of the events today, we hope, form part of the prescription to chart the return, reimagine the self, and root us in the memory of where we began. We also felt, when we were looking at this from a programming point of view, that there was no better book, no better story to open today's program with than the Grand Paloma Resort, written by Cleyvis Natera. And the conversation will be held in partnership with Lauren Francis Sharma. For those of you who have been following us for quite some time, know that both Cleyvis and Lauren are Bclf favorites. Mothers love all of their children equally, I believe that. So we love all our writers equally. Cleyvis and Lauren have a special place in our heart because when we began this journey all of those years ago, I think simply because we didn't have any social proof, it was a little challenging to get people to buy into what we were doing. Lauren and Cleyvis disabused themselves of the notion that we would damage their names and their careers as writers, and they joined us from day one. And so we're very, very happy to open with the story. The Grand Paloma Resort as a story is also it's a common metaphor for what happens in the Caribbean. We're often looked at as places where, well, there's a quip, I live where you vacation, and it's very often misrepresented and misunderstood by those who come to the shores of the Caribbean seeking adventure and seeking that all of their wishes are fulfilled. The Grand Paloma Resort looks at that And it also looks at it from another perspective, the hidden perspective, which is what the Bclf really is about. It looks at that story from the perspective of those who populate those islands and live in the resorts. So it's a much bigger metaphor. Cleyvis does an incredible thing by delving also into the complicated history of Hispaniola, the complicated history and the relations between Haitians and Dominicans who live in the Dominican Republic, and she does it with such sensitivity to the people who live there. We also felt that it was just the best way to start this festival off. She returns, and Grand Paloma is her second novel. Lauren is the writer of Casualties of Truth, which is her third novel. And this is a real full circle moment for us. And we believe that this timely discussion peels back the glossy veneer of tourist economies to reveal the tangled roots of colonial legacy, of economic precarity, and the ache of personal betrayal. Anchored in this year's theme of root and remedy, this event that you're here participating in considers storytelling as both excavation and reclamation. We will enjoy Natera's narrative, and we hope that it will become both balm and blade for each of us, that it will offer us an opportunity to critique, to look more deeply, and to see possibility through the healing of story. So I thank you so much on behalf of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival organizing team and our volunteers and our sponsors and our patrons. We hope that this for you will be an unforgettable conversation with two of the most vital voices in contemporary Caribbean American literature. We put our hands together, please, for Lauren and Cleyvis. And I'm going to ask our tech people, are they sharing this? Are you mic'd?
Yeah, we're mic'd.
Ah, okay, they're mic'd. I'm going to figure out how to take this one out.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. How's everybody feeling? I'm so happy to be back here with the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. I just have so much love for Marsha and Melanie. I have so much love for Center for Fiction. I celebrated the launch of my first book here, and it was just really lovely. So, like, my heart is so full, and thank you, Lauren, for agreeing to be in conversation
You
with
see
me.
my face, right? I'm like, you can interview yourself. You didn't even let me say a word. Oh my gosh. Okay, Cleyvis, second book, Grand Paloma. We were here in February because she was helping me with my book, but I am so excited. Oh my God. First of all, this is not a sophomore slump.
No?
No, this is the real deal. I mean, it is very, very good, and I love this novel so much, and I'm so happy you all are here. I'm sure that you've seen her all over, and you've seen this book all over, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to talk about it. So thank you, Marsha, and the whole team from Bclf for having us back together again.
Yeah.
Okay, should we start?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Laura and Elena, two sisters
Yes.
in the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
Laura works at the hotel.
Yes.
And Elena works at the hotel. She's a babysitter.
Yes.
One day, something happens with a little American girl,
Yes.
and there's real trouble.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, everything just takes off. And what I love about this book is that you have a lot of different points of view, but ultimately, it's about these two Afro-Latinas at this resort, two sisters. Can you just tell me, like, where this idea came from and what you were thinking?
Yeah, so, I started writing this book during the pandemic. So it was 2020, and we're all on lockdown. And I remember that, my children, who are 13 and 11 now, were at the time, much younger. And we had, to do virtual school, and my husband and I were both working full time. At the time, I had been trying to get my book, Neruda on the Park, out into the world without much success. So my agent and I had finally gotten to a point where we thought the book was ready to go, but then the publishing industry shut down. And so now we couldn't go to market with the book. And so I remember on top of there being this kind of global catastrophe, I felt like a personal catastrophe. Because, as much as I love the world and I was worried about everybody's health, I kept being the world can end before my first book makes it out to publication. I was just in so much despair. But, at the time, a friend of mine was invited to to guest edit a literary journal. And she had asked me if I had like a short piece. For years, I had been thinking about these employees in this resort. I mean, I had really been thinking about the dynamic. As I travel back to the Dominican Republic, I often had conversations with workers about the conditions, and I was just really fascinated by the idea. And so I think there was something to me about being locked at home, where, you know, all of our airports were shut down. Every border was shut down. And there was a big question in 2020, in that spring, whether or not we would reopen, like whether or not the world would ever come back to normal. And so I felt like that feeling of longing for my birthplace, for the Dominican Republic, and like the beaches. And I remember just thinking about that beautiful, beautiful place that is so fraught for me. And I just thought, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna write this short story, and kick off. And so in 2020, I wrote a total of 3 stories. 2 of them were published. And then over the next few years, I kept writing about these employees in this resort.
And these 2 sisters show up in these stories.
Yeah, so like at the beginning, the first story was about Vida and Pablo. So the first story was really, I had imagined that the entire book would be about the employees at the resort, with the protagonist being this love story between these 2 people. So the first story is when the curandera gets called to the resort because there's been an accident, and they don't want to go to the doctor. They want, someone from the local town to come help. And then very quickly, I realized as I wrote that story, and I wrote the next story with Pablo, that the 2 sisters were really the heart of this book, that they were like the most combustible dynamic. And so I followed that impulse to make them the protagonists.
Well, I was going to ask you to read, but I actually now want to talk about Vida first, because Vida is the healer who's brought in, right?
Yeah.
And the girls are clearly, the young women are clearly like a little nervous that this American girl has actually been in, she's got a problem. And so they bring this local healer in, and I find it really interesting, the beginning of the book, you just put your hand on this thing that some writers from the Caribbean are a little nervous to sort of enter into, this idea of magical, I guess we call it magical realism, I don't really know anymore, this myth. You really delve in there, and you really decided to expose this side of sort of Dominican and Caribbean culture as a whole. Like I love that, and I love the idea that that you don't hide from it, and you don't have to even excuse it necessarily. It's just a thing, and it's there. So what were you thinking when you decided on writing that?
Well, I mean, that was probably the biggest surprise for me, because I had decided after Neruda and the Park that I wasn't gonna do magical realism for my next book. I was like, no more magical realism for the rest of my life. And it was just kind of crazy. Like I always tell my writing students, I teach graduate level writing and undergraduate level writing. And I'm always telling my students, like, be careful when you tell yourself you're not gonna do something, because there's something I think like really quite rebellious about our imaginations, that the minute we, like on a meta level, tell ourselves I'm not gonna do that, it's almost like your imagination, it's like, bet, watch me. So when I started writing about this curandera, I remember feeling like this, it's just like the story flowed in such a way that I understood her role in the book was really to be one of the people who hadn't been seduced by the wealth and the proximity to wealth. Yeah. That she was someone who was really connected to the earth and to plants and to the ancestors. And so, I just remember that in that first scene, she's really using her body to heal this child. And I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me, here we go again. But there's something to me that felt really, really true to my own experience. I mean, I grew up with a mother who, she wouldn't call herself a curandera, but she taught herself a lot about plants and healing, because my older sister was born with sickle cell anemia, which is a really dangerous blood disorder. And at the time, we're talking about the 80s in the Caribbean, we didn't have a lot of medicine. Yeah. So my mom had to navigate, through her community to really learn about remedies for my sister. And over time, my mom became like a central figure, even after we immigrated and we live, she's still in the same apartment in Harlem. But I just remember her being that central person that people would come to for healing. you know, and I remember like as I was growing up and I was a teenager, you know, she would do limpias, which is when like you give like this spiritual bath. But the spiritual baths aren't just for like healing you because you have a stomach ache. It's also like bad luck. So like, is your man cheating on you? Like, you know, they would come and like, you know, bad luck with money, bad luck with like life. And so it seemed to me like this kind of beautiful thing I witnessed, first hearing it through the closed bathroom door, because my mom would be like whacking people with plants. And I would be like, what the hell is going on in there? But then people would come out and there would be like this lightness to them. You know, whatever you believe or don't believe about the power to heal, there's something about putting your hands on another person that is in distress that makes that person feel in some ways like somebody has helped offload whatever that distress is. And so I thought that it was really important to just not fight the impulse to have this one character be really connected to the earth and really connected to healing, even though what I was interested in writing about was really this like super slick, super modern workplace, because the book is ultimately a workplace book.
Well, you know, that makes me think, because I think it adds so much depth. It adds real connection to our legacy, right, in this book. And as I've been watching all the chit-chat about this book, there's a lot of comparisons to White Lotus.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because, you know, at first I remember thinking, oh, this is like a White Lotus, but it's not really. I mean, and you'll see what I mean if you've read the book, but White Lotus is fun, but this feels just richer and deeper. And you know, one of the things for me about White Lotus is like they forget that they're actually located. Like the locals are almost not even included, right? And this book is about the place. Yeah. How do you feel about the comparisons? Do you like it or not?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, I expected the comparison. You know, I started working on this book in 2020 as a collection of short stories. And, you know, I remember when I decided, you know, largely due to the guidance of some writer friends who were like, you know, for sure you need to go for it and try to sell this book. At the time, I really wanted to try to salvage my thesis book that I had written when I was a graduate student. And that's a book that's been in a drawer now for like 20 years. And so I remember like I had started revising that book. I wanted to sell it. And I had been writing these short stories about the resort because I just found that really compelling. Like I knew I wanted this book to be very different than my first book. You know, I wanted the plot to really be centered on the characters. So like what was gonna drive the action was like these characters that kept making terrible decisions, you know, and kept doing like things where like you would think these are unforgivable acts that these people are doing. And so I was thinking a lot about that being the propulsive element in the book. And so when the White Lotus came out in 2023, or maybe it was 2021 that it came out?
Maybe, I think so. That feels right.
I know I came to the show a little later. It had been on air for a while. But when I first heard about it, I know at that point I had published a few of the stories. And I just remember thinking, you gotta be kidding me. Like these people it's this huge show. And I think largely because of the pandemic, it took off in this phenomenal way. And, you know, there was a part of me that just felt like any writer who feels like there's a book that comes out that's like similar to your idea or a movie comes out, you very quickly feel like that's it. Like my idea has no legs anymore. But, you know, that wasn't the case. I mean, I ended up selling my book, this book, I ended up selling it before I finished writing it. And I think that the reason that I was able to sell it so quickly is because the White Lotus was such a phenomenon. So on the one hand, like I can't deny that I'm grateful for that. The other thing that happened that I think is really interesting is that as I really, you know, I sell the book in 2023, at that point there's like a second season out. And I just remember being like, oh my God, like this show makes my book necessary. Because the show just, I think it's like really important what the White Lotus is doing, and I personally like love that show. I feel like these messy white rich people, I love it, you know, but I'm not interested in that at all. And so I think like the fact that they are very much fixated on like those with the privilege, right? And that they come at the employees in the space through the lens of those that are privileged. I think also for my book, where like the protagonist are the workers. I mean, they are fully developed, and their life trajectory is not dependent on these other people. Even though, of course, it's like there's like there's a dynamic, there's an interplay. But I definitely felt like, I'm not mad at it. I think, the one thing that I did anticipate, which ended up being completely true, is that everybody would think I copied the show. And so, the early reviews have all been really favorable. I mean, I'm very fortunate that people have really, the critics have really loved the book. But everybody's like, Cleyvis riffs on the White Lotus, and I'm like, hold up, go on my website. Like, I have receipts. I started writing this book in 2020, and there are stories that mark that. And so there was a part of me that anticipated. And so there's this small scene in the book where one of my characters is overhearing one of the guests on her iPad listening to a show that might or may not be the White Lotus. And she's just thinking to herself, as if the most interesting thing happening at a resort are the guests, are the tourists, And so that was my tongue-in-cheek moment to be I know what people are gonna think. I think it's very rare that as Black women, as women of color, as writers of color, honestly, I think anytime that we do anything that is groundbreaking, I think it doesn't matter the timing, right? I think it's very quickly people jump to the conclusion that we must be copying it or that it's not an original idea. So I decided that for me, it was gonna be tongue-in-cheek and it was gonna be a funny exchange with a cultural moment because I know, right? That I was already concerned with these ideas years before.
Yeah. Can you read?
Yeah, I'll read. Okay. So I'm going to read. So for those of you, I'm imagining most of you have not read the book. So
wait, how many people have read the book? Yeah. Okay, so a few. Okay, good.
All right, fan club. Okay, so I am going to read just from the first chapter. And all you need to know about the Grand Paloma Resort, I think, Lauren did a wonderful job kind of setting it up. But the book happens over the course of 7 days. And it is centrally concerned with two women, two sisters, Elena and Laura. Laura is a middle manager who's really in charge of running the show there. And Elena, her younger sister, is a babysitter. The book opens with a letter from the resort to the guests. And the main thing that you need to know, because I'm going to read from that, is that, this is a very highly luxurious resort. And that it's the safest place in the Dominican Republic. No violence, no accidents have ever happened there. And so guess what happens in chapter 1? So I'm just going to read a little bit from chapter 1. The tourist child's mud-streaked body had become heavy, and sweat made her slippery in Elena's arms. As she made her way out from the tropical forest behind the Grand Paloma Resort, Elena headed not in the direction of the manicured grounds, but into the water-starved, cracked dirt of the staff quarters. Looking down at the little girl's unconscious form, she whispered, "Please, please, please don't die on me." We got a little music. She walked through row after row of beautiful casitas, alternating between vibrant turquoise and the brightest yellow, with a flash of hot pink every fourth or fifth little house, each decorated with flower beds full of birds of paradise and lilac hibiscus bushes. It was the kind of sight that would make a visitor sigh in delight. Unless they happened to touch the plants and realize they were plastic, nothing got water in this part of the resort. When she was safely inside the casita she shared with her older sister, Laura, Elena took a breath and looked around, unsure whether to lay the child on her bed or her sister's. Relief washed over her. No one had seen her. It was as if the dusty ground of the forest had lifted and shrouded her. She was paralyzed momentarily by the weight of the child's body. What was she, 60 pounds, 200? Elena was dizzy from the heat and humidity. She'd been hired to care for the now injured and unconscious child, looking after the girl by day and sleeping in a tiny, cot-sized room in the back of the kitchen of the penthouse the girl and her parents occupied. She hadn't been in the casita all week. Elena's side was as messy as she left it. Unmade bed, strewn clothes, shoes everywhere. It was shocking. Her sister always cleaned up after her. Elena laid the kid on Laura's neatly made bed. She called the girl's name and shook her gently. No response. The blonde bouncy curls that had swayed when they tried the latest viral TikTok dance that morning before their outing into the forest were matted with mud and blood. The kid's flat chest seemed too still. Had it been a mistake moving the kid? Thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay. Wow. Does the kid die? No, okay. All right. All right. So, as you were reading, I was thinking about that part where you were talking about the plastic flowers, because they're on the side of the resort where the employees live.
Yes.
And, essentially you're saying, things on that side are not as luxurious as where the guests get to stay. So there's this, if you've ever been to one of these sort of luxury resorts, on the way from the airport, you sort of see where people live, and then you get to your resort and you may never come off the resort, right? And so you never really get to see anything about Caribbean life, about this island. I mean, there are a few people who get off, but mostly you stay on the resort. So I'm curious, like when you were thinking about building this novel, you have to deconstruct this idea of what the Dominican Republic is to many American readers, because this part of the island and this part of the world, they have no clue about.
Right.
So where do you start with that? You started with plastic flowers, but then, then you build, and you're building this world. How do you know this world?
Well, I think the way that I came to know it was largely, it's like a liminal space that I think lives for us as writers when we think about our homeland and then our memory of our homeland versus what it actually is. So I think that maybe because when I left the Dominican Republic, I was 10 years old, and then we didn't get to travel. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money, so the first reason we couldn't travel back is because we didn't have a lot of money to travel back. And then, my father got very sick. My father passed away when I was 18, and we couldn't make it back because my mom couldn't afford, for all four of us to go back. So by the time I went back to the Dominican Republic, it was right after I graduated from college. And I remember that's what I did with my first paycheck. I was like, I'm going back to the motherland, And in my mind, over those years, it was like the country was the most beautiful. And I remember the house where I grew up, because I grew up in a house, we didn't have running water. There was a latrine in the back. But as soon as my mother immigrated to the United States, we moved to a bigger house, and it had running water. And we had a big backyard. And so, I had all these memories of going to the Dominican Republic, of being in the Dominican Republic and leaving. And when I actually went back as a 22-year-old, I just remember looking around and being like, what place is this? This is not the country in my imagination. And so when I thought about creating Pico Diablo, which is the town at the top of the mountain, and then, the Paloma Falls is a constructed town by the resort. And, part of the town has these really high-end luxury stores. And so for me, part of what I wanted to do was to tap into that country that I imagined before I saw it for what it actually was. And so I remember going back and thinking, okay, so where this place is located is past Samaná, in the ocean. It's a fictional place that doesn't exist in the Dominican Republic. But I was like, if I can situate that place of my imagination between 10 and 22, when I was longing and imagining and remembering a place that didn't ever exist, I thought that would be a really kind of fertile ground. And then the other thing I was thinking is when I traveled to Italy and I went to these beautiful kind of seaside towns, and I've been to the Far East, and I've been to Bali and Bora Bora, and I've been to all these places where the experience for tourists has been really tailored in a very specific way. And I was like, I want their contrast to be so stark that when we start with the employees, anyone who's been to a place, and you get to these places and you walk into the lobby and you're like, what is that smell? The only rich people breathe this air, And so I was like, I want this, for the reader to understand on page 1 that this is not where you are. eventually we get to like the resort and you get to smell the good smells and you get to see like this luxury and wealth. But I really wanted to make like that starkness. So I was thinking a lot about that place, the place of my imagination versus a place of reality, and situating my fictional world in a place that was like had lived in my imagination all along.
Laura works for this hotel, and she is moving up the chain. Like, she's probably, I would argue, probably the highest ranking local
Yes.
on the staff, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, but one of the things that I didn't pick up from the very first time is that I read it was that she's almost stained by the proximity to this corporation that runs this, right? Like, she's considered to be almost more American than the rest of the locals. And there's a separation that happens between her and the rest of the staff. Yeah. Sometimes her doing, sometimes others doing. But you write something really interesting. You say, and there's this long history of this sort of tale in Black literature where there's this separation of the people who you love the most fiercely and sort of your ambition, right? As children, they'd never been told that aside from running and seeking escape, standing their ground and fighting or jumping to their deaths, one also had the option to join the enemy, to serve them, that there was also freedom in not fighting, not running, not hiding, not dying. That maybe the sweetest freedom of all was one gained by silently acquiescing as indispensable servants. What were you thinking when you wrote that? I was like, damn!
I love that quote. First of all, let me just say that when I was constructing the character of Laura, I really like gasped all the time because I was like,
she makes me gasp.
She is like evil. And you kind of understand why, there have been times when, they lost their mom. You learned this very early on the book, no spoilers, but like they lost their mom when they were very young. And, Laura had to take a mother, like the mother role with her 4-year-old sister as a 14-year-old. And so, she has this feeling and this kind of resentment toward her community because she feels like they haven't really been there for her when she needed them, especially because her father wasn't like a reliable parent. And so there is something to me about Laura where I really just felt for her. I was fascinated for her as a character. We all want to write really complicated, thorny characters. But there were moments where I was like, te pasate. Like, she just like she kept crossing the line. And, and there was like an impulse that I had early on where I was like, I need to make her more likable in some ways. And then I realized that it would just be a betrayal to her character to try to make her more amenable to like what I consider to be respectable, kind of like a respectable woman, right? And so like her strength to me came from like this really hurt place. Yeah. And we're here like at the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival talking about botanica and talking about healing. And I feel like very often we don't talk about the fact that for those of us who have like ascended our class, who have gotten education, we end up really being like outsiders within our own communities and sometimes within our own families. Like there are times when people just don't trust us anymore. They look on us with suspicion, like how did you work out how to like navigate these hostile spaces, And so I was thinking about her as someone who actually, with very little resources, like as a server, in these conference rooms where these like rich strategic meetings are happening and she's just like picking up discarded shrimp tails or like, exchanging the cold coffee for a cocktail hour. She's like soaking in like learn all these trainings, all these things, right, that are happening in these trainings that people like fly to the Caribbean to like do retreats. And so I wanted her to really be someone who had drank the Kool-Aid. So I love that you said stained because I really felt like she was someone who like, it was like the ink of capitalism, the ink of ambition, the ink of wealth. Like it just like traveled up her body, and like really did become who she is because she believes that the road to freedom is this job. She believes the road to freedom for her sister especially. Because she wants her sister to have a path to like growth that isn't like serving people. And so much of what she does is really because she loves her sister and she wants to create a path for her sister. And so that's a lot of what I was thinking about with her was that, Laura has like a clear gaze. And when she looks around at the way that like her history has been given to her, from this, the fictional town of Pico Diablo has a real history in the Dominican Republic, is that the town was founded, and again, like these are not spoilers, but the town was founded by like freedmen and enslaved people that left the United States in the 1800s. And that's something that I learned when I was doing research many, many years ago. And so, there's like this legacy in that town of like giving people paths to like what would happen if like a massacre happened, what happened if like these terrible times came back. And so she is the one that's looking around being like, there is one option we've had all along that people don't talk about. And the option is to like join the enemy and be a servant. And like you can climb and be safe within that space, which I find very problematic, but that's just true to her and what she believes.
Well, you said something interesting about making her unlikable. And then something also that you do with this book is the multiple points of view, right? Two things that the publishing industry hates. And, we've both done multiple points of view, and and readers actually are not big fans of it, right?
Yeah.
Like they're always like, this was so hard to read, and but it is something that feels communal. And it feels like something that that people of color generally turn toward, is in a way to sort of give voice to many, as opposed to one. It's like a move away from that individualism, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very curious. Like, what were you thinking to yourself at the moment? Like, what these barriers are in the publishing industry. That people are going to be like, I'm not so sure if that's sort of the way she should have done this. Now, how are you overcoming that? And more importantly, I think that one of the things that I really, really love is that you don't shy away from giving space to the other voices that need to tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Thank you for that question. I feel like I really did have a hard time with this book. I mean, I know that I knew coming into it that the protagonists were gonna be two very flawed people. And, it put me in a jam a little bit, because I was like, as delicious as it is to like bear witness to people who are just making all the wrong choices, I was like, at the same time, I wanted like this idea of forgiveness, like a question about who gets to be forgiven, to be very central to this book. And I want like readers, it doesn't matter where you land, whether or not you think these mistakes that the characters are making are forgivable or not, or whether or not you would forgive them, but to also think, like, take a step back and broaden your own lens to think about what are the crimes on a world stage that are forgiven generally. I mean, we today are living through a time when I think like the crimes that happen on a global stage are no longer able to be hidden, because they're like on our phones, on social media, right? Like we're living through active genocides on different parts of the world. And so a lot of times, and when you think about back, right, colonialism was another series of genocides, right? And like, it's like, this is a story that's been happening and has been told, especially in the Caribbean. And so I was thinking a lot about, creating these characters that are like really, really flawed. And there's a part of me that gave myself the challenge that a reader would become complicit by caring about the characters. So the big challenge was, how do I get you to care enough about these two young women? One of them is a child. She's 17 years old. And she, I would argue, makes the most horrifying mistakes in the book. But also, like, how do we feel about forgiveness throughout the book? And it's not something that I'm not settled in as a human, but it's a question that I wanted to put in front of the reader. And then the other part, I mean, let me just say this, because I feel like as a reader, I come at books as someone who voraciously reads. Like, I love reading, and I get so annoyed with writers that have too many perspectives. Like, I'm always like, what is happening here? This makes no sense. Like, why am I following this person? I care about that person. Like, and so as a reader who like really gets so annoyed by like a shifting perspective, when I realized that the only way I could write this book with the conceit of the book is really like capitalism seduces us, right? The modern workplace seduces us into a sense of individual exceptionalism.
Yes.
And it convinces us that the way forward and the way to success is to leave everyone behind.
And even push down.
step on people, stab them in the back. I mean, think about it, the most violent terms you can imagine. That's what we're supposed to do. And oftentimes, I know because I worked 20 years in corporate America, you are richly rewarded when you do that. And so there's a part of me that felt like, you know, there is a way in which Laura has been rewarded for like being a tool for the master, right? Like she has been rewarded handsomely, right? She's like the highest ranking person, so she's doing something right from like the locals. And so I knew that the only way that I could tell this story, which is really about that tension between the individual and the community, workplace and the family, workplace and community, was that the lens had to be broad and I had to bring in other voices. So as someone who like does not like reading different perspectives, I was like, now I have to make sure that like there's no confusion for the reader on who the protagonists are. Because I do think that sometimes like the errors that we make as writers is that it's like everybody's story. It's not everybody's story. You know, this is a book about two sisters. And in that story, in order for you to understand these two sisters, you do have to hear from other people. This is a story about a place. I mean, the title of the book is the Grand Paloma Resort for a reason, right? So like the third protagonist, I would argue, is the resort, is the place. And I thought about tilting the place as an artifact where like we start with the dirt, so you get the history of the place. You get the history that is true on all sides, Haiti, Dominican Republic. You tilt it some more, you get like some perspectives from some guests, right? Privilege, and like, what's the underside of tourism, right? Is that people think people are a playground and the place is a playground. And then I thought for like the story to really have a spine, that I thought you had to understand the impact of like the actions. And not from like some blind, big, unknown corporation, but from Laura, you know, from like this flawed person. So part of it for me was like thinking if I can keep the plot tightly coiled around the two protagonists, so that even when you were in another perspective, it kind of comes back to this central concern with these two women, that I would be able to pull off having different perspectives. And it just took a lot of revision, because I have to tell you, like I really was like, I can't drop the ball on this. Because I know I hate it when I read books where like the focus is all over the place and you're like, what the hell did I spend just 10 pages reading this for? So every character mattered, and every perspective that shifted away from either of these two young women had to be adding something that was really critical to the story. Mm-hmm. And also enjoyable, you know? Yeah. Also, I mean, one thing that I'll say real quick is that I want the book to be sexy.
Well, I was gonna say, you can't get the sex without, sorry.
Yeah, I was just like, but I also felt like neither one of these two characters was concerned with sex. And I was like, I'm gonna need somebody to be concerned with sex, because I don't think we can talk about the Caribbean and we can't talk about tourism without talking about sex and the sex trade. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there were some like very enjoyable parts of writing this book away from the two of them who like couldn't care less about sexiness or like sex, you know?
All right, yes, it's sexy, for sure. And you do that really well, which I do not, by the way, and I stay as far away from sex as possible. But, okay, not in real life, people.
Tell us more.
All right, you mentioned Haiti, and I want to circle back. Yeah. And I'm going to say something that I haven't said in public, and I've never told you this before. But I haven't been to the Dominican Republic in probably 25 years on purpose, right? Like there's been a conscious decision for me not to go back. And you talk about, and every time I read a book by an author who is from the Dominican Republic, I'm holding myself tight. Like, what are they gonna say? Are they gonna address this issue? Are we gonna gloss over it? Are we gonna talk about anti-Blackness here? And you do. You know, you go right there and you talk about, you do the history, you talk about, Laura is a dark-skinned, relatively dark-skinned girl. So she's dealing not only with having risen up, but she's also dealing with all of this colorism that's happening in her space, in her corporate space, in her life. You know, her hair is a big issue for her. There's this obsession with her hair, making sure that it's perfect. You know, and I feel like I want to commend you for that, but I also want to talk to you a little bit about how to contend with these places that we love, many of our homelands, that are doing not good things. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll ask that. And then I was like, oh, we're here. right? Like we're in this space right now where we're living in this country and we're watching exactly the thing that that I was condemning one country for doing, right? And now I'm living here. So how do we reconcile that? How are you reconciling?
I mean, I think the only way to reconcile it is to push against it, I mean, I think like telling the truth is really important. And I know you and I have talked about this. I did not know that you hadn't been back to the Dominican Republic for this, but I do respect people that make that choice. I've made a very different choice. And I think my choice in like continuing to visit the Dominican Republic as much and as often as I can is rooted in the fact that like I just love my country. Like I love the land, I love the dirt. I feel like I don't feel as much as myself than when I am there. And I also feel like it's really important to me as someone who is an Afro-Latina, who is, I mean, people sometimes are like, rightfully so, look at the Dominican Republic, and there's been so many memes, right, of like people who are like darker than I am saying they're not black, and it's just like, I mean, sometimes I look at them and I want to hug those people, because I'm like, my God, what the world has done to us, to convince us that the only worth we have is like by either believing we're white or like believing that we're something other than black, and so like there's a part of me that feels like a very deep obligation to be in the Dominican Republic to bear witness and like to see what's happening. So I'll just say really quickly that, I read Edwidge Danticat's book, The Farming of Bones, when I was like after college, like I was in my early 20s. And I didn't know about the Parsley Massacre, that had happened in the Dominican Republic. Tens of thousands of Haitians were massacred at the command of the government. And it was as much about, punishing like Haitian people as for just being black, I mean, it was like very much like, and like Trujillo would say, like he wanted to whiten the race. He wanted like Dominican people to be light skinned or white. And when I found out about it, I was horrified, not just because I had no sense or no knowledge of the incident, and I had been in the Dominican Republic halfway through fifth grade, but also because in my own family, there were people who had lived through that. My grandparents, I had like uncles and aunts like who had no doubt lived through it. And so a lot of what I was thinking about, honestly, when I thought about how to come at it in a way that would feel true to me for these two characters, again, was I need to think about, first of all, through the lens of like that book that I read, like anytime I went back to the Dominican Republic, I would look at the country through like Amabel, who's the protagonist, and I'll be like, what would Amabel think, And like the Haitians were stripped of like birthright citizenship, they're stateless people now. And I was thinking about that, from like the 1930s to now, like the situation hasn't gotten better, it's gotten more cruel. And to your point, I feel like the Dominican Republic in some ways to me, like the way our resort is a microcosm for the world, I think the Dominican Republic in some ways is like a microcosm of the world. Mm-hmm. Like we pretend that the United States is more, maybe like kinder or more accepting, but like just think about what's happening right now, the way people are getting, rounded up, the way that like the history of like Black people in this country is being erased. Like this is something that I think is true everywhere. And so, yeah, so like to me it was really important to have my two characters have really different feelings about like the anti-Blackness and the racism and like the cruelty that we do to each other within our own communities. And again, I'm not concerned with like what the white people are doing, like I'm just concerned with us as a community. What do we do to each other? And so the two sisters have very different perspectives. Like Laura is someone who's like, good luck solving racism, she's like, this never gonna get, our answer is to get the hell out of here. Like if we want a better life, we just have to leave this island. And her sister Elena's an activist. Like she really believes that like there's hope and optimism that the world can become a better place if people like in solidarity bind to each other and fight against like these kind of post-colonial pressures that we all live under. So, I just wanted the book to like be true to like what is happening in my country today. And I wanted this book to be in direct conversation with the farming of bones. I wanted this book to be in direct conversation with Jamaica Kincaid's A Small Place. I wanted this country to be part of a conversation that I think I'm having with other writers about like what is the role of literature in bearing witness and in instilling some hope in like our readers about the possibilities for the future.
Oh, I love that. It's a great way to end. Okay, thank you, Cleyvis.
I was just getting warmed up. I'm like, what do you mean, thank you? We gotta get off the stage.
We have 10 minutes for questions, if anyone has any. Yes. And if you have a question, just raise your hand and someone will bring a microphone to you. Oh, yes, there.
So I have a question. So I was here for your first book, and you talked about how long it took you to write that book. I'm curious about your transformation as a writer, especially considering that you started this as short stories and it ended up being a novel. I want to know what that journey was like.
Well, look at her clothes. I mean, clearly.
I was gonna say, I'm showing a lot more leg these days. I'm showing a lot more leg, the transformation. Thank you for that. Thank you for that setup, by the way. I was like, look at the ponytail. You know, I feel like when my book came out, for those of you who don't know, it was a 15-year journey from like the first sentence to publication. And oh my God, the pain. I just didn't think for like 95% of that book's life. I would say 99%, because I really thought up until publication day, I was like, something's gonna happen. Like that will prevent this book from being read. And so getting to the other side of it, and I'll just say this for any of you who are writers. I know we're like in a space of readers and writers here. And it's like, it's so beautiful what happens on the other side of it. It's so worth it, all the tears and all the pain. It's beautiful, actually, being a writer in the world, even though it's also devastating and heartbreaking, but it's really beautiful and powerful. And so I think that because I sold this book before I finished writing it, I know for some people it might feel like, oh, is that like restrictive? But I don't know, there was something that I felt like my book made it, my first one, into the world. And people read it. I mean, it sounds like a miracle to me to this day that like people actually read this book, a lot of people. And so knowing that like this book might not be read, but it was gonna get published because I had already sold it, it just gave me this sense of like purpose and focus. And I have to say, like I also felt like ambitious in a very different way. Like I know that my ambitions as a writer do not align with the way that sometimes the marketplace chooses to like align us. And so like what I'm interested in is excavating like our consciousness as like communities of color. Like I'm interested in, as a writer, in doing things like that, like bringing you along and having you really root for the bad guy, you know? Like, I'm like, how do I write anti-heroes that are women, you know? And that like reflect the complexities of the women in my own family, my own complexities, you know? And so I felt like bolder in this way that I was like, I'm gonna take big risks, I'm gonna take a big swing. And I felt like in some ways, like just because I'm part of like an incredibly supportive community, like people like Lauren, honestly. Like I read Lauren's book as I was going through my final edit, and I was like, let's go, Lauren, because I didn't realize that she was doing something with suspense that for me felt risky as a literary writer, you know, because sometimes they don't take us seriously when you decide that you're gonna press down on the plot, you know? And so I don't know, like there's a part of me that just felt really bold and really powerful when I was writing this book. And I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen when it comes out, but I'm gonna take a big swing, and I'm glad that I did.
It feels like it. Feels like it. Yeah.
Clap, people. I mean, you're like, do I have to do something like dance? I'm kidding.
Hi, Cleyvis. Congratulations on your publication. I wanted to ask, in writing your manuscript, did you have a clear idea of where you were headed and perhaps even where you wanted to end? Or was that fluid as you wrote, and where you thought you might be headed, you ended up in another direction?
I think that's a great question. Thank you. You know, I sold this book as a proposal. So part of selling a book on proposal means that you have to hand in an outline. And so, you know, I had a pretty clear sense of the structure. I knew it was gonna be like over 7 days. You know, the original structure had a lot more characters, believe it or not. I ended up cutting some characters, you know, at the suggestion of my literary agent. So I knew where my protagonists were gonna end up. Like, I had a very clear sense of what day 1 was and what day 7 was. What ended up being really surprising was like how invested I became in like making sure that like the past would become relevant to the present. Because I didn't want this to be historical fiction, and I didn't want flashbacks where like, oh, like 100 years ago, you know what I mean? Or like 90 years ago. So it was really important to me that like anything that is rich about this place, right? Because like the locals don't have a lot of like material wealth, but they have like a wealth that is like very difficult for other people to understand who aren't from our islands, right? And so like it was important to me that that wealth and that richness come through the characters. And like, so I think those were the parts that for me ended up surprising me, that I was like, I didn't include the Haitian Dominican dynamic in my proposal. I was like, let's hope the editor likes it, because I knew that that had to be like a big part. But I also knew that I had to figure it out as I wrote the characters, because it had to come through the attitudes and the feelings of the characters and the memories of the characters, that it wasn't gonna be like a standalone part of the book. Yeah, I really appreciate that question though, because I think sometimes we think we know where we're headed. And even for me, like that I have mapped out the whole book, I was so surprised along the way. Like the narrative really does have its own heart, its own spirit.
Are you an outliner generally?
No. This was my first outline.
Okay. Good job.
I appreciate that. We learn new things when we need to.
And one more question, maybe?
A follow-up.
Okay, Jason, yeah.
Hey, Jason.
Oh my gosh, possibility of tenderness in the house, yes.
Just as a follow-up to what you were saying with the outline, I wondered as you wrote, did a lot of it go out the window? A lot of the outline? Oh, sorry. Yeah, did a lot of the outline, how much of the outline just went out the window and like a new, you know, did it undergo a lot of transformations? Basically what I'm asking. And also another question about, you talked about selling it on proposal, which is like really stunning to me. So I was wondering if you had chapters to go along with the proposal, and how many?
Yeah.
So just practical questions.
Well, that's actually a really good point, because it's really unusual to be able to sell a novel before it's written. So that, you know, that's kudos to you for sure.
Thank you. I feel like Cardi B at the trial, where I was looking at my editor like, you know I'm talented. Look at me. You know I'm talented. You know, I actually felt, and forgive me because I'm like moving too much with this microphone. But you know, you know, one of the things I realized, and it's because I work in corporate America for 20 years, is that I think a lot of times we as writers are like, kind of encouraged to like divorce ourselves from like a strategic mindset and to like divorce ourselves from like a business mindset. And one of the things that I decided after many, many years of failure was that like when I started building my career, I was gonna bring all of me into it. And so, you know, what that meant to me is that, you know, as my paperback came out, my editor said to me, I haven't bought fiction, do you have a book to sell me? Like, do you have a book? And at the time, I was revising another book, right, my thesis, and then I had been working on short stories. And I had like 100 pages of, maybe 120 pages of like different stories that were about this resort. You know what? The White Lotus was huge. And I remember talking to some writer friends, and they were like, just try to sell that book, because it'll sell fast. And so, you know, even though like what my heart wanted was to like take this very literary book I'd been working on when I was 20 years old into the market and try to sell it, I knew that I wasn't gonna sell that book unfinished, you know, because it's doing very interesting, beautiful things, but it's just a slower moving book. And so, yeah, so like part of what I decided when I decided to like sell the book, I think it was an opportunity because my editor was eager. My editor and I love each other. And so like, I know that she would be willing to take the risk on me because we had worked really well together. And so, you know, sometimes I know we're encouraged to be difficult and push back, but I'm just like, just be professional. Like, be kind, appreciate other people's labor. Like, have a good, I know we're all like the brand. I'm like, just be a human being out there because it'll serve you in your work and in your business. Like, I love Valentine and they love me. They just bought a third book with even less pages than like my second book. And so, you know, I think like part of it for me was like putting a really strong outline together and then also knowing that I could depart. And just to finish, I was like, I'm gonna sell the best idea and I'm gonna write the best book. And those two things don't have to be aligned. Because I know that a publisher wants a good book. So I was like, even if I depart, which I did a lot, I knew that what I had to deliver had to be great than the outline if it wasn't the outline. And so that's the way that I'm coming into it for this third book.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for coming, everybody. This is great.